I'm John Lehrer. I'm the MSU University Carillonist. That means I'm in charge of our 49 bell carillon, which we see around us. We are actually in the belfry of Beaumont Tower right now. So we are on the fifth floor of the tower, probably about 70–80% of the way up to the top. And we're surrounded by 49 cast bronze bells, ranging from quite large to, well, I can't strike one of the upper ones, but actually quite small, only about 15 pounds. This is what produces all of the sound that you hear on the ground from Beaumont Tower. If you hear a clock strike, it is automated, controlled by computer, but if you hear music, it is being played live. There's always a human up here playing, either myself or an assistant or one of my students. This instrument was started in 1929 when Beaumont Tower was dedicated, but we only had 10 bells then. We have 49 now. So this is one of the interesting carillons that was built up gradually over time. You know, every decade or two we would add more bells. So this bell right here is from the 50s, whereas this bell to my right is one of the original ones from 1929. The last edition was in 1996. It is a completely mechanical instrument. So if I'm playing it live, if I'm playing music, there are no motors or electronics to assist me. Literally, we just have this big, heavy cast iron clapper that hits the side of the bell. Clapper itself probably weighs about 200 pounds. Bell weighs several tons, and this wire over here connects to this one down here, and that connects to my playing console. So all of these 49 bells can be played with a key from the console, and all it does is that. As you can imagine, there's some weight behind the keys on these larger bells, and as you can imagine, I have some control over how hard I strike it. So I can get it really soft, and I won't play really loud up here, but if I were to do that, we'd have a lot of sound in this belfry.
Live from the East Lansing skyline, this is 88.9 bringing you The Basement, and tonight we are very much not in a basement. We're actually having a very special episode today, live from our very own Beaumont Tower. So I'm your host, Liv, as always.
And I'm Griffin.
And our special guest today, would you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm John Lehrer. I am the University Carillonist, which means I play the carillon in Beaumont Tower, which is the bells that you might have heard.
Well, it's an honor to have you on the show tonight. Could you talk us through a little bit what your responsibilities entail and why this tower is so important to MSU as a campus?
Yeah. Let's start with the tower. So this tower is almost 100 years old. We're at 95. It sits on the site of the first ever classroom building at MSU, which means it was the first ever land-grant classroom building ever. That building collapsed after about 50 years, There were plans to put, of all things, an artillery garage in this site. John W. Beaumont, who had studied in College Hall, did not want that. He wanted something that would sort of honor that original building. So he basically got this tower built with a musical instrument in it and got the entire space around the tower protected so that there's going to be no other buildings in this lovely green space we have. As far as my responsibilities, I'm responsible for using this instrument that we have to enhance campus life, culture, support the university, support the community, help people breathe a little deeper, slow a little down, enjoy the world around them in this sort of fast-paced, high-pressure setting that we're all working in. So it involves regular playing. I teach students. We're training the next generation of Carillon performers here. Special events. Keep your ears open for a Halloween event coming up on the 31st. Tours, outreach, education. Basically just trying to get as much use and service out of what we're so fortunate to have here.
Well, nice. Thank you, John. Now, Beaumont Tower is a big part of Michigan State culture, whether you're popping a bottle of champagne on the door all over in front of it, or, you're just walking to class and you hear a beautiful composition. But I wanted to ask you, how long have you been part of the community here in Michigan State, and how did you land this position?
I came here in 2022, so I'm just starting my third year now.
Nice.
I've been playing the instrument for almost a quarter century, more than half my life now. I started in college, much like many of my students, and then didn't stop. I started doing things on the National Carillon scene, and then started studying abroad in Belgium, where I went to the oldest conservatory for Carillon. Did some international competitions, did a lot of international touring, worked at a Renaissance festival for a while. That was kind of fun. And eventually, this position came open, and I thought it would be a good fit, so here I am.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, talking about all of these communities, it's apparently a very widespread, if not very historical community. It goes way back from what you're describing.
Over 500 years.
Yeah, and the first piece that you played today kind of ties into that, correct?
Yeah, so that's something that you could have heard 500 years ago in a medieval European city, either in Belgium or the Netherlands or France, sort of before those borders were established. That was where cities were popping back into existence after European feudalism. And so bell towers initially existed for communication. No radio, no TV, no cell phones. If you want to tell people to arrive at some place at some time, bells in a really tall tower was a way to coordinate entire city life. Around 1500, people started using them for more than just signaling. They started using them for art and for music. And it became this huge thing that spread throughout the Low Countries. Every tiny little town would have their carillon and their carillonist, and they would be playing melodies for the market days and special events. There was some church music, but there was also music that you would have heard at the pubs the night before when you were drinking and singing with your fellow citizens, I guess, in the city. And, I guess 500 years later, here we are, very different context. But in some ways, public arts and arts integrated into life and into the landscape of where we live and work is just as important, perhaps even more so, because it's very difficult for many of us to set aside several hours in the evening for a concert and check schedules and all of that. And often the people who are busiest and who can most use a little infusion of joy or something beautiful in their lives don't have the time to schedule it in themselves. So I think as we're moving through the 21st century, like this is something that's going to get more and more important.
Well, I just think it's so beautiful how music is timeless and how a carillon can bring a community together. And just as the sun is setting right now, I think it'd be even more special if you played another composition for the people here on campus to listen to.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Okay, so we've got. How about I play this? I'll play this instead. It's fall. Summer is, undeniably on its way out, as is the setting sun. So it's sort of a good piece for this time of year. It's called Autumn Leaves. It was not written for carillon. It was written for voice. And, presumably some piano or orchestra accompanying. Bit of an old jazz standard, old French chanson, if you will. You might not recognize the verses, but you might well recognize the chorus. And it's all about sort of reminiscing about a love lost.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for playing this for us. I would love if you could talk us a bit through the actual mechanism of this instrument, because it looks a lot like a piano. For those who are just listening, it kind of looks like a piano, but it's got pegs in place of keys, but it works pretty different from what I understand, right?
Yeah. So the layout is piano. You've got your natural keys, you've got your accidentals, sharps and flats above them, groups of twos and threes. From there, it gets a little different because we also have pedals, much like an organ. So you can play notes with your hands, you can play notes with your feet. Sounds like a lot of possibility. There's one catch, which is that these pegs are, or keys are pretty far apart. And they travel probably about 2 inches from top to bottom. So it's a much bigger movement than a piano key. It's a much bigger key than a piano key. So you usually end up playing with closed fists, or occasionally with like an open hand holding 2 notes. But these big chords that you might see in a piano concert, those take a bit more cleverness or ingenuity to pull off. Sometimes I tell people it's like if you imagine a squirrel trying to play an organ, how it might look, just with that scale. Other times it's like, well, imagine that you were playing piano, but you only had 1 or 2 fingers on each hand, but you do have 2 feet, so it's almost like you have 3 hands.
So with a piece like this last one that was not written for this instrument, what are some of the changes that you might make to adapt it?
There are quite a few. Number one, you might thin out some of the chords. Bells have a lot of what we call overtones or harmonics. There are other frequencies that are higher than what we call the fundamental pitch or the note that it sounds. So you get a lot of harmony built up just in the sound of one bell, and so you don't necessarily have to play 12 notes at once to get a complex sound. We have a lot more power in the bass than we do in the trebles. They're just smaller bells up there, so we might do things where we'll bring melodies downwards into the bass and accompaniment above in some sections. Those are probably some of the bigger changes. There are also some harmonic considerations because any instrument you play will have these multiple frequencies that compose a single note, but they're different frequencies for bells. And so what harmonies might sound really good, or what voicings, if we're talking about chord arrangements, what might sound good on a piano might not sound as good on a carillon, and then things that might not sound so exciting on a piano might really come to life on a carillon because of those harmonics.
So to elaborate on what you're saying is that the arrangement can be any type of music and have it be converted for the carillon? And so I have a question. So what is your favorite arrangement to play?
Well, it varies with the seasons, and it varies with the years. So this is, Autumn Leaves is a big one that I enjoy, but I also like to play a lot from, film scores, familiar, I'll go to like, rock from the 90s or 2000s, or, probably going to move into some Taylor Swift at some point. It really runs the whole gamut.